The sun had just begun its slow descent behind the hills of Sunset Ridge, painting the skies in tones of amber and blush, when Clara Jennings first saw him. He was a silhouette at first, a stranger with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and dust on his boots. Walking up the gravel path that led past her grandmother's old cottage, the place Clara now called home. Clara wasn't expecting anyone. Sunset Ridge wasn't the sort of place people passed through unless they were lost, or looking for something they didn't yet know they needed. She assumed he was the former Dot from her perch on the porch, mug of tea in hand. Clara watched him approach with a polite but cautious interest. She'd been living alone in the house for nearly a year, ever since her grandmother passed and left it to her. Life here was quiet, slow, and often lonely but predictable. A lone traveler was a disruption she wasn't sure she welcomed. He slowed as he reached the gate, tipping his head toward her. "Evening," he said, his voice low and steady. Not intrusive, not urgent, just a greeting. "Evening," Clara returned, her voice measured. "Sorry to bother you. I'm looking for a place called Millie's Diner. I heard it was down this road, but I think I took a wrong turn." Clara blinked. Millie's Diner had shut down 2 years ago, just after the highway was rerouted. Hardly anyone remembered it, save for locals who had eaten there during Sunday afternoons, or the truckers who'd once made it a stop on their way out west. "It closed a while back," she said. "You won't find much else in that direction, just the lake and old farms." He nodded slowly, as if letting the information settle into his bones. "That figures. It's been a long walk already." She hesitated. Her instincts told her to be careful, but there was something in the man's tone and exhausted honesty that reminded her of the way grief had made her speak after her grandmother died. "Where are you headed?" she asked, finally. He shifted his duffel bag and looked up the road. "Nowhere in particular, just passing through." Of course, Clara thought. Just passing through. She took another sip of her tea and considered her options. She wasn't one for charity, but it was getting late, and the nights up here could get cold fast. "There's a bench by the barn," she said, gesturing to the side of the cottage. "You can rest there for a bit if you'd like. It's safe here." His lips curved into a small smile, one of gratitude more than amusement. "Thank you. That's kind." He turned and walked toward the barn, his steps steady but heavy with weariness. Clara watched until he disappeared around the side, then sighed. She hadn't expected company, much less a stranger with stories etched into the lines of his face. That night, as the stars emerged one by one above the ridge, Clara lay awake in bed, her mind restless. She didn't even know his name. She told herself it didn't matter, he was just a traveler. A speck in the timeline of her quiet life, but something tugged at her. Before dawn, she rose, unable to sleep any longer. As she pulled on a sweater and stepped outside, the chill of morning air caught her breath. She made her way toward the barn, half expecting to find it empty, the man already gone. But there he was, sitting on the bench, sipping from a thermos he must have carried. He looked up as she approached. "You're still here," she said. Surprised, he nodded. "Didn't want to leave without saying thank you. You could have left, I wouldn't have blamed you." He smiled again, this time with a glint of warmth in his eyes. "I could have, but something about this place. It feels like it's holding its breath, like it's waiting for something." Clara looked around, at the mist curling low over the fields, the way the light caught on dew-covered grass. She'd felt that, too, many mornings. That sense of something on the edge of happening. "I'm Clara," she said finally. He stood, extending a hand. "Daniel," and just like that, something shifted. He was still a stranger, still passing through, but so was she. In a way, they just didn't know yet how much further their journey had to go. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of day that makes you want to linger outside a little longer, soaking in the calm before the world wakes up. Clara found herself brewing an extra pot of coffee, the smell filling the small kitchen. As she glanced out the window, Daniel was already outside, moving around the garden near the barn. His movements careful and unhurried. She wasn't sure why she felt compelled to watch him, but it wasn't the usual curiosity reserved for strangers. It was something softer, an instinct that maybe, just maybe, he was more than a passing traveler. Maybe he was someone who might linger longer. When she stepped outside, Daniel turned and smiled. "Morning, morning," Clara replied, offering him a cup of coffee. He accepted it gratefully. "So, what brings you to Sunset Ridge, Daniel?" "Besides getting lost, of course," he chuckled, taking a slow sip. "I guess, running away." Clara frowned slightly. That was a vague answer, but it hinted at more beneath the surface. Running from what? He looked at the ground, hesitating. Things I didn't know how to face anymore. People, places, memories. The weight in his voice was unmistakable, familiar even. Clara nodded slowly, thinking of her own losses, her grandmother, the dreams that had quietly slipped away, while she cared for that old house. Sometimes, running feels like the only way, she said softly. Daniel looked up, eyes thoughtful. Yeah, but sometimes you realize running doesn't change anything. For a while, they stood in silence, the kind of quiet that feels like an unspoken conversation. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and earth. So, how long have you been here? Daniel asked, gesturing toward the house. Since my grandmother passed away last year, I inherited this place. He nodded. It must be hard, living here alone. It is, but it's also peaceful. And it's home. Daniel's gaze softened. Home can mean a lot of things. Sometimes, it's just where you stop running. Clara smiled, not sure if he meant it as a question or a statement. Over the next few days, Daniel settled into a quiet routine. He helped Clara with chores around the property, fixing a broken fence, clearing brush, stacking firewood. His presence was steady. A comforting rhythm that filled the silence of the house without overwhelming it. Clara found herself opening up, sharing stories about her grandmother, about the history of the cottage, about the little town nearby that still held memories in its weathered buildings and dusty roads. In turn, Daniel shared fragments of his own story, a lost love, a job that ended abruptly, a family he had drifted away from. Each piece was a careful unveiling, as if he was testing the waters of trust before diving in completely. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Daniel spoke quietly. You know, I always thought I'd find answers by moving from place to place. But maybe the answers aren't in the distance. Maybe they're right here. Clara looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. She reached out, lightly touching his hand. Maybe, she whispered, but for the first time in a long while. Both of them felt the stirrings of something neither expected. The possibility that this unexpected meeting wasn't just a coincidence. That the passing through might just be the beginning. Days turned into a week, and the line between visitor and resident began to blur. Daniel no longer seemed like a man simply passing through. He had settled into the rhythms of Sunset Ridge, moving through the days with a quiet determination that caught Clara's attention. Clara noticed the way he worked tirelessly, but without haste. Each task approached with care, as if honoring something invisible. It was clear he wasn't just fixing fences or chopping wood to stay busy. He was rebuilding something within himself. One morning, Clara found him crouched by the old oak tree that stood at the edge of the property. Its gnarled roots twisted through the earth like veins, anchoring the tree firmly to the ground. He was examining the soil, running his fingers through the dirt, as if searching for answers there. What are you doing? She asked, approaching. Quietly. Daniel looked up, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, trying to figure out how deep the roots go. Clara raised an eyebrow. Metaphorically speaking, or? He laughed softly. A bit of both. I guess I've been so focused on running, I forgot the importance of roots. She considered this for years. Clara had stayed close to home, reluctant to leave the safety of her grandmother's cottage. She had buried herself in memories and routines, afraid of what change might bring. But Daniel's presence was a reminder that growth often required both courage and patience. Maybe roots are what keep us grounded when everything else feels uncertain, she said. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. And sometimes, those roots are where we find our strength. The days continued with quiet conversations and shared silences, moments when words weren't needed. They cooked meals together, laughed over small mishaps in the kitchen, and watched storms roll over the ridge from the safety of the porch. One afternoon, Clara invited Daniel into the attic of the cottage. It was dusty and cramped, filled with forgotten belongings and boxes of her grandmother's things. As they rummaged through the relics, Clara found an old photo album. She handed it to Daniel, who flipped through the pages with gentle curiosity. The photographs captured moments of a simpler time, family gatherings, holidays, and everyday smiles. Your grandmother had a beautiful life here, Daniel said softly. She did, Clara agreed, her voice thick with emotion. She was the heart of this place. Daniel looked up, eyes meeting hers. And now you are. Clara smiled, the weight of his words settling warmly in her chest. That evening, As the sun dipped low, Daniel shared something he hadn't mentioned before, an old dream he'd left behind, a chance he never took because of fear and self-doubt. "I was going to be a carpenter," he said quietly. "Build things that last. But I ran away before I even started." Clara looked at him, her heart aching for the man who had been so broken yet so quietly hopeful. "Well," she said, "there's still time. You could start here, if you want." Daniel looked surprised but grateful. "Maybe I will." In that moment, the cottage didn't feel so empty anymore. It was no longer just a relic of the past but a place where new stories could take root. Clara realized something important. Sometimes, the people who come into your life unexpectedly aren't just passing through, they're planting seeds for something lasting. The following weeks settled into a rhythm both familiar and new. Daniel started spending his mornings working on the barn, repairing the weathered wood and reinforcing the beams. He moved with quiet purpose, the smell of fresh-cut timber filling the crisp air. Clara often found herself watching him from the kitchen window, feeling a strange mix of admiration and something deeper she hadn't quite named yet. One afternoon, after a morning of steady work, Daniel wiped sweat from his brow and stretched. "I could use a hand with this beam," he called out. Clara paused, her hands deep in a bowl of bread dough, then set it aside and made her way outside. The warmth of the sun wrapped around her, mixing with the faint scent of pine and earth. Together, they lifted the heavy beam into place. Their movements were synchronized, a silent conversation of trust and cooperation. Clara realized that for all her years of solitude, she hadn't been truly alone as they worked. Their conversation drifted from small talk to something more vulnerable. "Have you ever thought about what it means to build something from scratch?" Daniel asked, his voice quiet but steady. Clara considered this. "I think it's about more than just construction. It's about hope, about believing in the future even when the past feels heavy." Daniel nodded. "Exactly. And sometimes, it means repairing the broken parts, not just of things but of ourselves." She looked at him, surprised at the raw honesty in his words. "I guess I'm trying to build a new life," he continued. "One where I don't run away from the hard stuff." Clara smiled softly. "Me too." That evening, over a simple dinner of stew and fresh bread, they shared stories of their childhoods, their dreams, and their fears. Daniel spoke of a town far away, where he'd left behind a life full of expectations and disappointments. Clara spoke of the years she'd spent caring for her grandmother, the dreams she'd set aside, and the loneliness she'd learned to accept. As the fire flickered in the hearth, the space between them seemed to shrink. The walls of the cottage, once heavy with memories of the past, now felt alive with possibility. Days turned into weeks, and the barn began to take shape. With every nail hammered and board replaced, Daniel and Clara were building more than just a structure, they were building a bridge between two people who had both been weathered by life, but still yearned for connection. One rainy afternoon, as they stood side by side watching the storm, Daniel turned to Clara. "You've been my rock," he said quietly. She blinked, caught off guard by the vulnerability in his voice. "I thought I was the one helping you," she replied softly. He smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "We're helping each other." In that moment, Clara realized the truth she'd been avoiding. Sometimes, the people who seem like strangers are exactly the ones who become your foundation. The gentle rhythm of their days was interrupted by the first big storm of the season. The sky darkened suddenly one afternoon, and thick clouds rolled over Sunset Ridge with an ominous rumble. The wind picked up, bending the trees and rattling the windows of the cottage. Clara and Daniel were inside when the rain began, heavy drops pounding against the roof like a drumbeat. The storm was fierce but brief, leaving behind a washed clean world. "I hope the barn held up," Clara said, worry tightening her chest. Daniel stood by the window, watching the rain slant sideways through the trees. "We'll check first thing in the morning." That night, the wind howled and the power flickered. The house creaked as if sharing its own unease. Sitting by the fire, Daniel reached for Clara's hand without thinking. She didn't pull away. The touch was reassuring, a quiet anchor against the storm raging outside, and the storms they both carried inside. Morning came clear and bright. Together, they made their way to the barn. The structure had weathered the night well, though the earth around it was soggy and the smell of rain-soaked wood filled the air. As they worked to clean up debris, Clara noticed how Daniel moved with a renewed sense of purpose. The storm seemed to have washed away more than just leaves and dirt. "You're stronger than you realize," she said, handing him a hammer. He glanced at her, eyes soft. "So are you?" The days that followed brought unexpected visitors. Neighbors, who had heard about the stranger staying with Clara, they stopped by with casseroles, invitations, and offers of help with the barn. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt the warm embrace of community. Daniel too was welcomed. His easy smile and quiet strength slowly melted the initial wariness that some locals held toward outsiders. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the hills, Daniel shared a secret he'd kept tucked away for years, a letter he never sent, addressed to the person he loved and lost. Clara listened without interruption, her heart aching with the weight of his words. When he finished, she squeezed his hand. "Thank you for trusting me," she said. He smiled, eyes glistening. "I'm starting to believe that maybe I don't have to carry it alone anymore." Their bond deepened with each passing day, no longer defined by the idea of someone just passing through but by the shared understanding of pain, healing, and hope. One evening, as autumn leaves began to blanket the ground, Clara looked at Daniel and realized she was no longer afraid of the future. Because sometimes, the strongest rocks aren't the ones beneath your feet, they're the ones beside you. As the days grew shorter and the air crisper, the bond between Clara and Daniel deepened into something neither of them had anticipated. What had started as a chance encounter between two souls seeking refuge had grown into a connection anchored in trust, patience, and quiet understanding. Clara found herself looking forward to mornings filled with laughter and shared cups of coffee. Afternoons spent working side by side in the garden or barn, and evenings wrapped in the comfort of each other's company. The walls of the cottage no longer felt like a place of solitude but a sanctuary. One afternoon, while repairing a fence along the property line, Daniel paused and wiped the sweat from his brow. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I never really believed I could stay in one place for long. But here, it feels different." Clara smiled, setting down her tools. "Me too. It's like this place is healing us in ways we didn't expect." Daniel nodded. "I've been carrying a lot of weight for a long time, expectations, regrets, mistakes. But with you, I feel lighter." She looked at him, her eyes soft with affection. "You don't have to carry any of that alone anymore." They worked until the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. As twilight deepened, they sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a cozy blanket, the world around them fading into quiet stillness. Daniel reached out, taking Clara's hand gently. "I think I've been passing through life without really living it, but now, I want to stay with you." Clara's heart fluttered, a warmth spreading through her chest. She squeezed his hand, a silent promise. That night, as the stars shimmered above, Clara felt a peace she hadn't known in years. The future was no longer uncertain or frightening. It was filled with possibility, grounded in the steady presence of someone who had become her rock. They didn't need grand declarations or dramatic gestures. Their love was built on the small moments, shared smiles, quiet support, and the simple act of showing up for each other. Clara knew that life would still bring challenges, but with Daniel by her side, she was ready to face them all. Sometimes, the strongest foundations are formed not from concrete or stone but from hearts willing to anchor each other through the storms. The first snow of winter had begun to dust the hills of Sunset Ridge, transforming the landscape into a quiet, white wonderland. The world seemed to slow down, inviting reflection and stillness. Inside the cottage, a fire crackled warmly, casting dancing shadows on the walls, filled with memories and new beginnings. Clara stood by the window, watching the snowflakes settle softly on the garden she and Daniel had tended together. The barn was sturdy now, a testament to their combined efforts and shared dreams. It was more than just a building, it was a symbol of how far they had come. Daniel joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. They stood side by side in silence, comforted by the simple closeness. "Do you remember the first time you came here?" Clara asked softly. Daniel smiled. "I thought I was just passing through. And now, he said, turning to look at her, "I know I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." The past year had been filled with unexpected turns of chance meeting, quiet healing, and the slow unfolding of something beautiful neither had dared to hope for. They had both been broken in different ways, but together, they found strength. Clara reached for Daniel's hand, feeling the warmth that had grown between them. "You were my rock when I thought I had none." He squeezed her hand gently. "And you gave me a home when I had nowhere to go." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in peaceful silence. Inside, their hearts were full. They knew that life would continue to bring challenges and changes, but they had discovered something precious, a partnership rooted in trust, resilience, and love, no longer passing through. No longer running away. They had found in each other the place where their journeys could finally rest. Home wasn't just a place, it was a person. And for Clara and Daniel, home was here, together.